Hey, everybody. Let people start trickling in here. Welcome. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about all things MDF. My name is Lindsay Sayre. I'm our Director of Strategy here at Real Access, and I'm joined by Ann Strandberg. She is our Head of Strategic Partnerships. And we're both super psyched to be here doing a deep dive into MDF for you. So basically our main goal today is to just take all the learnings and all the experience that we have around MDF over the years, running dozens, maybe even hundreds at this point of MDF programs, and really condense that all down for you guys today into a 1-hour session. And hopefully save you guys some time and even some trial and error as you're going and designing and executing on these programs yourself. And we want this to be as valuable as possible for everybody here today. So whether you're somebody that's really new to MDF or somebody that's kind of an old pro, but maybe just here to pick up a few tips and tricks, we want you to get a lot out of this. So to help make that happen, if you guys could do me a small favor and pull up your chat window, and in there, just drop a number between 1 and 10 on how well versed you feel you are in MDF. So 1 being like super new to you, you don't really know much about it. 10 being you're kind of an expert, maybe even you should be up here teaching this session instead of us. So just go ahead and drop your number. And what this does is it helps give us a baseline of where you guys are so that we can make sure we're tailoring the presentation to give you guys as much value as possible. And as you guys are typing that, let me just quickly walk you through kind of the format we're going to use today. So we want this to be pretty interactive. Anne has prepared some slides, but we are going to leave a lot of time at the end for Q&A, probably around 20 minutes for that. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions about a slide or any questions about something that Anne's talking through, if you could right then drop that into the Q&A window, that would help us out a lot. I'll be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. So if there's a question that's timely, I'll jump in and I'll ask Anne right then. If it's something that's more general, then we'll save it till the end and we'll cover that in the Q&A section. And before we jump into the presentation, one other small favor to ask of you guys. So again, if you could pull up the chat and in there, just drop in what's the main reason you're here today? What are you hoping to get out of this webinar? What this helps us to do is, we've done our best to guess on what you guys are going to want to know about MDF and put that into the slide deck. But if there's some key takeaway that you guys are looking for that we don't have built into the slides, then that's going to let us circle back around and cover that in the Q&A portion. And then also, so the most common question about any webinar, is this being recorded? Yes, this is being recorded. So we'll go ahead and we'll send you the recording and the slide deck afterwards. So you don't have to be stressed about that. You don't have to be trying to furiously take notes as we're talking. We'll make sure to send you guys all the resources afterwards. All right, so let's jump into this. And if you can click to the next slide. So I know some of you are past clients or currently working with us, but some of you, this might be your first time meeting us. So you might be wondering, like, who is Real Access? Why should we really be listening to you about MDF? So we are a full service demand generation agency, and we only focus on the business to business tech space. And a huge part of that tech focus is in IT and the channel. And we were founded in 2018. Since then, we've helped dozens of vendors, disties, partners run marketing and sales enablement campaigns. And during that time, we've managed more than 600 campaigns, generated over 30,000 leads. We have developed more sales and marketing assets than we can really even count. And we've used all of that to drive millions and millions of dollars in sales for our clients. And so why listen to us about MDF? So the majority of the programs that we've run over the years have been funded through MDF, and we're really experts in the space. We know it extremely intimately, and we work with parties on both sides of the fence when it comes to MDF. So we work directly with vendors to design and standardize programs that they can then offer to their partner base, and then we help those partners run those programs. But we also work directly with a lot of partners to develop custom campaigns that fit their unique needs, and then help them pitch those programs to their vendors, help them execute on those programs, and then drive ROI that they can then go back and report to the vendor. So we've really, the goal here today is we've taken all that experience, all that knowledge about players on both sides, what programs work well for everybody, what are common pain points, what are things to stay away from, and then what are things that work really well. And we've kind of boiled that down into our presentation for you guys today. And there's really no better member of our team to walk you through all of this than Anne Strandberg. So like I said, Anne is our Director of Strategic Partnerships. But before she came and joined the Real Access team, she ran the marketing department for one of the nation's large system integrators. And over there, she worked with several different manufacturers and secured millions of dollars in MDF funds from them. And then through the programs that were MDF funded, she then generated tens of millions of dollars in revenue for her company, as well as those vendors. So she's a pro in all things MDF, a total expert, and especially from the partner perspective, which I know most of you guys are coming from. So without further ado, I will hand things off to her. But just again, a friendly reminder, as you have questions, please do drop them in the Q&A section and we will cover those as we're going or at the end. All right, thanks. Over to you, Anne.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. That was quite an introduction. So hi, everyone. And again, thank you so much for being here and taking the time. Like Linda said, my name is Anne Strandberg. I have years of experience, not only in the IT industry, but also working with MDF. Previous role, I was in charge of the marketing department and all of our MDF initiatives. I was able to secure more than once 6 figures from vendors to run multi-tactic campaigns. Were super successful. But I know that MDF is not an easy route. And I saw in the chat here that all of you are kind of in between 1 and 8. So we're all over the map, which is perfectly fine. It's hard. It's really, really hard and challenging. And especially if you are working with more than one vendor, because more common is that the programs between the vendors are different than are similar. So not only do you need to understand what MDF is and how to use it, you need to understand what the different guidelines and policies are between all the different vendors that you are working with. So what we want to discuss today, I want to take you through just some basics on MDF, what it is, what's in it for you, dive into some eligible activities that I have experience with, how to choose activities, how to best gain the MDF dollars, and kind of a high-level overview of the process of what it looks like, talk about proof of performance and kind of checks for success and what to do next. What do you take from this webinar and how can you actually put it into action? Like Lindsay said, drop questions throughout the webinar if you have them and we'll answer them. We can also do the Q&A session towards the end. Okay. So what is MDF? Most of you likely know that it stands for Market Development Funds, and this is a type of incentive that vendors provide ecosystem partners to drive sales and marketing programs. Sometimes confusing by saying that it's marketing development funds because it can actually support both sales and marketing initiatives. It can also be both monetary and knowledge-based. I'm almost certain that most of you work with this from a monetary standpoint, which is you get money from the vendor. But some vendors also give you this in the form of, they just provide you a lead list or marketing resources, and that would be considered knowledge-based MDF dollars. They can also be proposed and earned. Not all vendors offer these 2 buckets of money. And it's basically what it sounds like. Proposed, you submit a proposal, typically on a quarterly basis, can also do it on 6 months or annual. The earned is based on your sales and the revenue you're driving for that vendor. So the more you sell, the more you often get in MDF dollars. And the whole funding philosophy is drive awareness, drive sales, both for you and for the vendor, obviously. The main thing though, what's in it for you? Why should you care about MDF? Money. Like very, very often do we see partners having issues to get a really solid campaign off the ground because of financial constraints or resources. So this is where the vendor comes in. They have the money and they can support you to a well-funded multi-channel campaign. The vendor, however, they're looking at this from the relationship standpoint. They could easily keep the money in-house and do the campaigns or initiatives themselves. However, by using you as a partner, you've already developed these relationships and connections and a loyalty in your regional market in a chosen vertical. So it's easier for them and a lot faster to penetrate into something that you already have developed rather than them starting from scratch. We all know that building relationships takes a long time. So They're looking for the relationships and connections that you already have, and they give you money in exchange for that. Some common eligible MDF activities. I'm sure most of you have likely touched on one or even multiple from these different buckets of activities. This is not something that every single vendor is going to offer you. They may offer some. One vendor can support you from an SEO standpoint and paid media, another one might not. So this is not me saying that this is exactly what you can do with all the vendors you work with. More so, these are common activities that are typically approved. You always want to lean into the program overview for the MDF with that specific vendor before even deciding on what you want to try to execute on. A couple of things that I want you to know when it comes to choosing activities and what down the road of actually claiming funds for it. It's very, very common that a lot of partners go the event route. And if you do, make sure that you don't try to host an event and expect the vendor to pay a separate bill for alcohol or a separate bill for entertainment. A lot of vendors are pushing back on that these days. It was a lot easier years ago. Now they're not really seeing the ROI on that. So be careful if you plan to take your customer and prospects to a really expensive sporting event. Make sure that that is actually approved. It may top the per person maximum cost, which is typically around $200 or $250. So always do your research before going the route of hosting an event for MDF dollars. Another thing that you don't see on here and would most likely not get approved, gift cards and gift vouchers. I would not recommend doing that. Some vendors might let you do that as a gift to an attendee, but I wouldn't even try. Same thing, don't try to use MDF dollars for your own infrastructure cost, not going to fly well with the vendor. And political and charitable activities and contributions, same thing there. I've actually had some experience with a charity related to MDF dollars, but if you go that route and if you have anything charitable on your proof of performance claim, make sure that you know for a fact that they're going to pay that before you even go down that route. Also, don't ever try to use MDF dollars to enhance your own margin with that vendor. It's not going to work well either. So how do you even choose then? And what should you be thinking about from all of these different buckets of activities? So first and foremost, one and done activities are out. I would never recommend anyone to just look at an MDF activity as a snapshot in time, which is typically an event. You just do it here and then, and that's it. And then you don't have like a follow-up strategy on that. Even if they get approved, like I said, a lot of vendors are starting to pull back on some of these things because they're not seeing the ROI. So instead of that, focus on things that are building relationships, and not only with customers when it's time to renew something, but a long-term strategy and with prospects too. And this is something that takes time. It takes time, and you want to focus on nurturing people, and you want to include outreach or activities from multiple channels. Think website, email, social, events, phone. Think all of these mediums as part of your MDF activity. So if you want to do an event, cool, but think about what else you can do so the event is part of a bigger picture and a bigger long-term strategy. Okay, so we've talked about some common eligible activities, what MDF is, and how the mindset you can have when you want to choose an activity. I want to dive into what you can actually do to best gain the MDF dollars from different vendors. First and foremost, when it comes to MDF, sales always comes first. That's what the vendor is going to look at. Are you actually, in fact, driving any revenue for them? Some vendors might give you MDF dollars as a new partner or up and coming partner. So you don't really have a revenue track record yet, which is fine. But you have an agreement, you may get X amount of dollars as a new partner, and then you just get to show them that this is worth their investment. But typically, if you're already working with a vendor, they want to see that you have revenue coming in. And one thing that I would recommend is that you have one person at your company with the partner that is in charge of the revenue numbers with the vendor that you want to work with for MDF. And I know a lot of you may have super small marketing departments, but this is so valuable to have this one person in charge of the numbers to make sure that this is the threshold, this is what we need to hit for this vendor to even be eligible for MDF dollars. If you don't know that, it's really hard to play the game, but have a person in charge of it, keep track of it. Once you have that person and start looking at what vendors you are currently generating revenue with, select your top 3 or maybe top 5 vendors to work with. Because with my experience, my last company, I think we had 300 or 350 vendors. And I'm pretty sure that 80% of those offered MDF programs, but there's no chance that I, one, had the bandwidth to go after that many vendors for MDF dollars. Second, it just didn't make any sense because I was just trying to boil the water then. So you want to focus in on the vendors that matters, vendors that you already make revenue with. Know the top 3, top 5. And when you've decided that list of 5 vendors, get to know the programs, the ins and out of the MDF and partner program. So you want to, typically they have a partner portal. If they don't, reach out to your channel person with the vendor and ask for the MDF program overview, partner program overview, so you know what are the requirements, what do we need to know to actually get MDF, and what type of activities can we execute, what are the proof of performance. Just learn everything, but focus on the top 3 to 5 partners, not every single partner that you're working with. And once you have done 1, 2, and 3, you want to just go all in and show that you are a trustworthy and committed partner. And there are a few ways you can do this. Certifications. Almost every single partner program and MDF program will require that you have a certain amount of certifications. And this can be for sales, it can be engineering, but it can also be marketing. Just make sure that you tick all the boxes and get your team up to speed on what kind of certifications that you need and how many to, again, reach the threshold of that MDF bucket. Another good thing to do, sales reports. This is so often overlooked, but I would put a cadence. Check who your manager, the channel manager with the vendor, check with that person on a cadence. Like, how often do you want to hear from me and how we're doing? Bi-weekly, monthly, whatever it is, make sure that you send a report on how you are doing, like number of certifications reached, the revenue, like anything that you're contributing for that vendor, put that in the report and send them to this channel person on a regular basis. That shows that you are committed to this program and to them. Another way to do, to show that you're committed, focus on executive connections. Work on relationships with the vendors, not just the channel person in charge of MDF dollars, but try to connect with more people at the vendor so they know who you are, so they know your business, so they can maybe even recommend you and your campaign down the road. You can do some name drops when you're trying to get these MDF projects pushed through. Just build that connection and never stop doing that. Just focus on building as many as you can. Lastly, events. And I know this has obviously been hard during COVID, but now when events are starting to come back, whenever you have a chance to meet with someone at a vendor in person, take it. Be there, whether that's smaller happy hour, networking events, lunch and learns, conferences, trade shows, just show your face. And again, build in that relationship so they know that you are committed. Lastly, obviously, you're ready to demonstrate that you have your strength, you reach all the requirements, you're showing conversion rates, and you have a highly motivated team of salespeople, you've developed the relationships, you're ready to apply. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time. There's a lot of work to be done here, but by taking each and every single step here, you will likely have a lot easier time to get more MDF dollars with the top 3 or top 5 vendors that you decided to focus on. So wanted to touch on this a request and process overview. Keep in mind that every single vendor that you work with might do this a little bit different. So this is more of a high level for those of you that have never done any sort of MDF campaigns before and have no idea where to start. This is just a little snapshot of what to expect. So obviously you need to start with the plan. So the previous slide, you've done all of that. So now you're going to put the plan together. You've decided you're going to go after a multi-tactic approach for X amount of months. You plan it internally. This is your responsibility. But then I would go to the channel person on the vendor side, get their buy-in. They don't need to do the plan with you. They probably would love to stay involved if they can, but get at least their buy-in on what you're trying to do so they are on board. Because if they're not on board, it might cause issues down the road. You want them on your team. So when you have the plan ready to go, put together a proposal. This can be different from different vendors. Some vendors have a template they need to use. They have a lot to fill out. Some, they just require you to send in an email. Some got a partner portal. Whatever it is for your own and to show that you are prepared and actually done your research, put together a solid document with your proposal, outlining the initiative that you wanted to execute, expected outcome. Are you going to generate a number of leads? Are you going to generate a certain revenue or downloads or views? Whatever it is, put it all into a document. Then you go submit it. So if you submit it in the partner portal, you can attach the file and you obviously fill out the fields in the portal that are requested for this activity. And then I would even send it over to the channel manager. So again, they can see that you're committed, that you did your research. You want this relationship to work for both you and the vendor. The activity approval, it's on the vendor side. So they're responsible for this section of the process. They typically get buy-in from their field, the team on their side, and make sure that everything is aligned with the policies and the guidelines of their program. If it's denied, they should tell you why, and hopefully it's just something that's missing and you can resubmit it. Once it's approved, you move over to the activity execution. And here's a really important note. Do not execute an activity until you have the approval. I wouldn't even be happy with a verbal approval. Always have it in writing. If it's a partner portal, you would obviously get it through the portal or like notification emails, but don't go execute until you know for sure that they're going to reimburse you for this. That can cause a lot of issues down the road. Once you've executed, you need to upload proof of performance and claim your funds for this activity. And we're going to dive into the actual proof of performance a little bit deeper, a few slides down here. But go back to the portal, submit anything that is related to the activity. If it's no portal, you typically send an email with the proof of performance required. This, you know what's required because you've already studied the plan early on in the 1 through 5 step. So you know exactly what information you need to submit. Once that is submitted, it's typically passed over to a claim audit. And it's not uncommon that a vendor use a third party for this. So imagine that this third party, they've just provided a checklist. So they're just going to go off of this checklist and make sure that everything is on there that is required for this specific initiative. So again, it's good that you already know before you execute the activity what's needed. You submit it, they audit it. If denied, they'll let you know why. You can resubmit. If approved, you move over to the reimbursement, and you, at this time, you get your funds and you're responsible for paying any third parties that you had involved in the activity execution. And to continue on this process overview, and I know we've received some questions on the timeline itself. This is also at a high level, not necessarily always going to be the same for every single vendor that you work with. But at a generic view, the activity window is considered the window from that you submit your proposal to the activity completion date. It's typically a quarter, so up to 90 days, but it can also be 6 months. Depends on the vendor that you work with, but it's still called the activity window. And you always want to make sure that you execute your activity within this window. I have not had any major issues if the date of the activity change, if you start a campaign sooner or later, or if an event is moved up or anything. That's typically not an issue as long as you let them know, but you need to make sure that it's within this activity window. If you start executing things outside of the window, that can be really hard to then get pushed through for reimbursement. So make sure that you know these dates. The partner portal, once you submit an activity, should give you the dates you have to keep track of. If it's not through a partner portal, make sure that you get this from your channel manager, account manager on the vendor side. They should have this information for you. Once the activity completion date is passed, you need to submit the proof of performance, again, handled by a third party, very common. If the claim or it's lacking proof of performance, it's going to get declined. They're not going to get you your money if you're not giving them what they initially told you that you need to. So don't bypass this. It's typically 30 days from the completion date, but this can also be different depending on who you work with. I don't ever recommend waiting 30 days. My old team, I would tell them to submit within 7 days of the activity was completed, mainly because we were so involved. So the team itself, they knew about the proof of performance. It was just fresh in their head. So don't wait too long, get it down on a paper and submit it right away. But that will also allow you some time. If it's denied and they push it back to you, you have time to go back and forth. And don't be scared if it's not approved. It's super common that there's always something missing. But that gives you the time to go back and forth with the audit reviewer and whatever they're needing. So you have that window. Some vendors will let you keep working on the claim after the claim submission deadline, as long as it's submitted before the deadline. But I wouldn't trust this. It's not always the same. Some vendors do not allow this. Don't lean into that. Submit the claim sooner to make sure that you have enough time in that window to adjust anything that's needed for the proof of performance. Once the claim is approved, you should get paid. And this payment window is also different depending on who you work with. Some vendors will reimburse you on a specific date every quarter. Some do the last day of their quarter. Some do exactly 30 days after the claim is approved. It really depends on the vendor, but I've never seen anyone go longer than 90 days after the claim was approved. So 30 or 60 to 90 days is the most common window to get paid. And you can get paid a few different ways. You can have an agreement with them to say that you're going to get credit. They can be ACH, or they can send you a check. It's not uncommon that vendors use a third-party payment portal. And I actually got stuck in this once where sitting around waiting to get paid, and we had the money the entire time, but I was never informed that there was a third-party portal for this. So claim is approved, they paid the portal, but then it was my responsibility to get access to this portal and transfer the money over to our bank account. So they may not tell you this, the auditor or whoever's processing the payment, so make sure that you check this either in the program or with your channel account manager with the vendor. They should know this and kind of point you where you need to go and set this up if that is the case. Proof of performance, POP, POP, you may even have seen proof of execution, POE. It all kind of is the same thing. And high level basically shows that you did what you told the vendor that you would do. And now you want to get paid for that. It is always, always, always going to be required. And I have never had any success trying to negotiate any different proof of performance than what is outlined in their program. So the best way to do this is to don't pick an initiative that you don't think you can meet the proof of performance. Like make sure that you know, this is the activity I want to execute. These are the required proof of performance. And I know for a fact that I can get this. It doesn't mean that it has to be great. Like you can have a goal of a certain amount of leads or downloads or sales. That's fine. It's fine to not always hit it, but make sure that you know what's expected and how to do your best to get there. That's what they're going to look for. And if you don't know, if you're running out of time and you need to submit proof of performance, you're not sure about exactly what's needed for this specific activity, make sure that you cover these 3 bullet points. Submit a documentation showing that the activity that you have was actually the activity that was approved, and that the expenses are related to the activity, and that you have all the reimbursement amounts specified on itemized invoices. If you have these 3 items, you can go ahead and submit the proof of performance. What will happen if something is missing, they'll let you know. So running out of time, I've done this a couple of times. I submitted with this basic information, and then the auditor will let me know, here's a list of things that are missing. And it's much easier and faster for me to just go through my documentation and see, okay, this is what I need, rather than if I don't have time to read the entire program that can sometimes be 40 to 50 pages. It can be quite overwhelming. So this is a kind of fast tracking the POP process if you're running out of time. I still recommend that you know before walking into an activity what is going to be required from you when you get to that claim process. It's not some common things that they're going to request depending on what you're doing can be anything from third-party invoices, invitation agenda, copy of presentations, any sort of campaign materials or assets that was created in association with this activity, collateral. And a good thing to remember with all of these assets that may or may not be created for this specific activity, make sure that you know if they need to be co-branded. And not only if they need to be co-branded, but how they need to be co-branded. Mostly the vendor is going to require that anything that you do for their MDF dollars, that their marketing or their logo is on there. But some of them even have a specific logo for you as a partner. And not only you as a partner, they can be a specific logo depending on what level of partnership that you have. I got completely ripped on one claim because I used the vendor's regular logo. I just assumed that that's fine, but we were supposed to use the vendor logo, and underneath it was Premier Partner, I think. And they pushed back my entire claim, and I had to work really hard to even get that approved because they didn't tell me that. It was my responsibility to read the program and know the ins and outs, and that I needed to use a specific logo and brand guidelines for everything that I did for that vendor. So definitely check on that.
One other common mistake that we sometimes see partners make around branding and co-branding is know if the vendor requires approval from their brand team on your assets ahead of time as well. So sometimes before you can actually launch a campaign, the vendor will need you to send their brand department your assets so that they can check that you actually are following the logo and the brand guidelines. And if you're not, then that's good, because then you get notified at the beginning of it before you've launched anything that, hey, you're using the wrong logo, use this one instead. But we see sometimes partners will get to the claim process and like Anne was saying, realize that they either had used the wrong thing or that they had forgotten to send it and get the brand approval. And then sometimes it can kind of be a scramble to try to get something rushed through the brand department of the vendor. So just something to be aware of to try to save yourself a headache or a kind of a stressful submission process with your POP.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. It's a really good point. Just know the ins and outs, check with if it's not clearly outlined, at least check with your account manager on the vendor side to make sure you got this covered to save yourself the trouble afterwards. Another good thing to check beforehand, like typically you run any sort of activity that's going to generate leads or an attendee list, make sure that you know what information that the vendor is requiring for that activity. Obviously, it's almost always going to be name, email, title, company, phone number. But some vendors might even require a zip code for all the attendees, and it has to be their zip code, not just like the event zip code. So check on that so you're not stuck with 100 attendees afterwards and a list of that you have to manually go find their zip code. That can cause a lot of headache for you and your team. So check on that. Check if they also provide a specific form that you need to use to fill out any leads or attendees. It's very common that they use that these days. It's typically just Excel. It shouldn't be complicated, but just to save yourself the time. If you do any sort of call campaign or any calling included, it's very common that they require to see the call script that you used for that campaign as well. So I'm not going to read into every single bullet point here. Like Lindsay mentioned in the beginning, we'll provide this deck for you, but a couple of things to really highlight to checks for success. I mentioned it more than once, don't execute your activity prior to approval. Like don't even start it beforehand. Make sure that you have that official approval before you go run a campaign or host an event, or you may run into some crazy issues down the road to get reimbursed. Once you have the approval, know your activity dates and deadlines. Time flies, and it's very easy to miss that claim and deadline. So as soon as you are approved, check the portal, check with your account manager that you know when to start, when to end, and when to submit, to save yourself that headache towards the end. And remember that the reimbursement amount will not change. Whatever the vendor approved in the activity approval, that is the amount that they're going to pay. However, if you submit proof of performance showing less, they are going to pay you less. So you want to make sure that your proof of performance actually hit that number that they approved, or you will get less money. But you won't get more money. If the activity ended up costing you more, they're not going to pay you more. At least I've never had experience with that. So make sure that you hit the number that you initially was approved for when you submit your claim. Also, plan in advance. Like, it's very common that the vendor is asking you for quarterly submissions when you put MDF proposals together, but they don't plan quarterly. They typically plan a year in advance. They're just asking you quarterly. So what you should do is plan a year in advance. Put an annual marketing plan together. And even if you're only submitting for one quarter at the time, show them that this is part of a bigger strategy. And they may not be able to say, we're going to give you the money for quarter 2, 3, and 4, but just by showing them that you have a long-term strategy in place will take you a long way to get access to their MDF dollars. So now what? We've given you a lot of basic knowledge around MDF, activities to choose, how to choose, focus on relationships, focus on long-term. We also would recommend that you focus on activities that promote thought leadership and education. This will not only help you with brand awareness, but examples of this could be creation and distribution of articles, newsletters, podcasts, videos, case studies. And by doing this, you position yourself as an expert within that field, and you keep nurturing your audience with this, so you stay top of mind. So when it's time for this customer to either buy more or a prospect to become a customer, they're already thinking about you because you've already shown your expertise in this particular topic. So focus on thought leadership and education. Whenever you can, promote software solutions. I know this is obviously not always possible, but we all know that there's still a supply chain issue. Software is not impacted. So if you can, focus on software over anything that needs that it's connected to the supply chain. Also, show that your company is different. People want to work with people, not brands necessarily. So inject personality into your marketing any chance that you can. A few ways to do this. It may sound super basic, but when you're sending emails, send emails from an actual person instead of a company name. They'll take you a long way. If you're holding webinars, make sure that it's being held or hosted by the specialist, like an expert at your company. So you have the knowledge there to show that you know this topic, the ins and out of it. Show if you put any articles or blogs out, have a bio, show who wrote this. That puts personality behind that content as well. And I'm sure that most of you do some sort of social media marketing from the company page, but bring in your team on social media. Give them the tools and content and pictures to post on their personal social media sites as well. not to force anyone, but if they want to, this is a perfect way to get to reach a broader audience, but help them. Don't expect them to just write something themselves. Give them the content on what they can post and bring them into this bigger picture of social media marketing as a whole. Also, whenever you can, incorporate pictures or videos of team members into your marketing and sales assets. Not always possible, we get that, it's just an idea. If you can look past the stock imagery and use real pictures, would highly recommend you do that instead. Because again, people want to do business with people, and this will take you a long way.
Just one thing I'll add, especially on point number one, this can seem kind of counterintuitive sometimes because, as I'm sure any of you that have done MDF programs before know, the focus is usually on like, how do we drive SQLs? How do we drive sales? Like, obviously the goal is to drive revenue. So a kind of a common misconception that even a lot of the vendors have is that a partner is going to be able to take someone from not even knowing who that partner is all the way to actually selling the vendor solution in a period of a quarter, or sometimes even like 1 to 2 months. But anybody that has more of a sales or marketing background, you probably know that that's not generally how things work. Every once in a while, you might get lucky and can pick up the phone and somebody's ready to buy right then. But for these programs, it's very difficult to take someone from not knowing who you are to a sale in a short period of time, and almost impossible. So, a couple slides ago, Anne talked about trying to have a longer term plan, almost an annual plan. So things like thought leadership and content assets can be especially important in the beginning parts of that plan. These are the things that drive more awareness and position you as a thought leader. So you're getting more top of funnel eyeballs on your content. And then as your plan progresses, you can start to focus more on actually, how are we going to get these people that are looking at our content to actually convert and get into our sales pipeline. So you can have a plan that progresses, but the other piece too is that content marketing in the last really decade, that is how people make buying decisions now. It's very uncommon somebody's going to just get a cold call and then decide to buy from you. They're doing a lot of online research. They're out there looking at resources. They're having conversations with a lot of different potential partners to buy from. And so everything that you can have online content wise that boosts your credibility, that gets your brand in front of them, all of that adds up so that when they are ready to actually make the purchase decision, like Anne said, you're the person that they pick up the phone and they call. So this point number one, especially, this is part of this long-term focus that Anne's talked about several times, where you shouldn't be short-sighted when it comes to your MDF. You need to think a little bit bigger and a little bit more long-term. And this is a huge piece of doing that.
Thank you, Lindsay. So last slide before we jump in and open up to some more Q&A, some key takeaways. Whenever you do this, focus, or whenever you're trying to gain marketing dollars from vendor, focus on assets that you can continue to use long-term after this activity day, not just, again, this snapshot in time. And it goes back to what Lindsay just said on content. Design programs that gives you long tail content and assets, things like case studies, email sequences, collateral, videos, things that you can use more than once. And then you want to also focus on or trying to do things that you can recycle, like use them for more than one thing. So a good example of this would be if you submit an MDF project for a blog sequence, and you get X amount of blogs created on a specific topic or service or offering, then you can also turn these blogs, you put them on the website, obviously, but you can turn them into PDFs. And these PDFs can be handouts that you give to your sales team. So whenever they meet with prospects, they can leave something behind that talks about that specific service offerings that the meeting was all about. You can also use this PDF as part of an email. Like you can have it just in your own email signature, like learn more about X, Y, and Z, and they can click on there. Or you can add it to an email sequence and do sort of a drip campaign with this specific content. You can also take snippets from these articles and turn that into social media posts for the company page, but also for the employees. Give them images, give them the piece of content to post, and you all of a sudden you have social media activity on the same topic there as well. You can even take it as far as record yourself reading these out loud, maybe even with a video, turn it into a podcast, the video podcast, upload on podcast platforms, maybe even YouTube. Again, another channel, another way for you to get your brand out there. And I know we're talking a lot about this, but plan long term. Don't plan quarter to quarter. Develop an annual marketing plan, even if the vendor is not going to give you 4 quarters in advance, or maybe not even 2, but it shows that you have a solid plan in place and that you know that this quarter is just part of a bigger picture. They will 100% vouch for someone with a plan in place than someone with just a snapshot of this is the one event that we're going to do, and then we don't have an idea anymore. But just give them the whole plan right away, even if they only give you 1 quarter at the time. And a good way to think about the dollars that you're asking for, think about it in a way like, is this how you would spend your own marketing budget if you had the money, if there was your money? That's what the vendor is looking for. They both want to, this should be a win-win out of this. That is what we had on my end, Lindsay. Welcome back.
Okay. Yeah. So if anybody, we'll jump into the Q&A portion here. If you've thought of any questions, but maybe haven't dropped them in the chat, feel free to do that now. But we do have a couple questions in the chat here. And then I know some people submitted some ahead of time, so we can jump into that. So Heather asked, she was hoping to today get out of this presentation, the kind of learning about what campaigns can deliver best results for building pipeline, how to maximize the results after campaign is ended. For example, how to continue engaging with leads received from a campaign. I think we covered a few points of that. Heather, if there's anything more specific, let us know. We can dive into it. But I think the one thing I'll add that maybe we didn't talk about is we've talked a lot about how to plan long-term for your actual MDF marketing. But I think the piece that sometimes people forget about, or it can be hard depending on how much marketing funding you actually have, but you don't have to fund all of your marketing through MDF. It's good to have your own marketing budget, and you can use MDF programs to enhance that. So one option for how to kind of get longer term results out of these MDF programs is to do what we talked about, have the annual plan that kind of builds quarter to quarter. But you can also use the MDF to kind of kickstart other efforts. So as an example, vendors care about generating leads. Launch an MDF program that generates the leads, but then if you can't secure MDF funding for nurturing those leads, that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to nurture them, but you might just have to come out of pocket to do more nurturing activities. So one thing I definitely recommend that makes the nurturing a lot easier is to have a CRM, especially if you can get one that has more marketing automation attached to it. The one we typically recommend is HubSpot. We do a lot of HubSpot work. We're a platinum partner. That makes all of this a lot easier. And the benefit of that too is you can gain a lot of metrics around your nurturing. So you obviously put the leads into your database, and then you can start to send them emails, have the sales team call them. You can even do advanced things like lead scoring. And again, Anne said, have these sales checkpoints with your channel partner at the vendor. This is all then data that you can be showing them to try to secure your next MDF program. So if you can say, hey, these 20 leads that we got from the Q1 program, now we're in Q4, and here's everything we've done with them since on our own dime, and we've gotten them this much further towards a sale. Now we want another campaign that's going to give us that final push. That's a lot more likely to get funded. And a lot more likely to have a good result for you, because you don't just have these leads that have been sitting cold waiting for the next MDF campaign. So again, it's kind of long-term thinking, but leveraging tools like automation, like good CRM products, as well as sometimes even kind of going into your own pockets are ways that you can kind of continue to get the value out of this once an MDF campaign has ended. Okay, Ariel, do you have a sample annual plan? We plan on a quarterly basis. Since that's the cadence we have with partners, but I've always wanted a more long-term plan. I think it's typically the annual plan super specialized. So, I mean, we don't have like a typical template that we would give to partners to use, but I mean, I think the key kind of questions to ask yourself are, at the end of the day, like, what are your marketing and sales goals, and use that as your starting point, and then figure out how the vendors fit into that. So earlier, Anne talked about kind of look at all your vendors and pick the top 3 to 5 you're going to go after. So sit down, kind of figure out what your goals are for the year, look at what vendors you think can help you reach those goals, and then build the annual plan that way. I mean, also, like, if you're looking for a third party partner to help you with something like this, we help a lot of partners with this. So if you want to send me or Anne a note after, we could definitely help you out with that. Okay, so we got a question. You kind of touched on this in the timeline section, Anne, but like, how far in advance should someone start planning a campaign? I think this is like outside of when they actually start the official claim process. Like, how soon should they start thinking about what they want to be doing?
At my last company, we actually planned a year in advance, and we typically had the annual plan. The goal, we didn't always have this, but the goal was to have the annual plan at least a minimum a quarter before you want that annual plan to kick off. But it's hard to do that. But it goes back to also what Lindsay, what you just said, like whatever your marketing and sales plan is, you kind of want to couple this with the MDF planning. So when you put your plan together for your next year, also put together the MDF plan and see how they both fit together. So do them at the same time instead of treating them as like separate objects. Plan them together, and the sooner the better, but at least a quarter in advance you are trying to kick it off would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think what I've seen a lot is partners can kind of fall behind, and obviously the vendors a lot of times do quarterly funding. And so as an example, if you're planning for Q1, if you don't start thinking about what you want to do until mid-February, and then you're scrambling to try to get a program kind of pitched and submitted before March ends, then you're kind of scrambling to actually execute the program. And a lot of times you actually cut short the window you have to actually do the program and get the result, which can just make it harder. It's obviously the longer you have to get a result, the easier it typically is to get that result. So yeah, trying to plan the quarter in the quarter that you're in, I definitely don't recommend that. And if you can have an annual plan, even better. But if that's not doable for you, then at least try to plan it in the quarter before you actually want to run the program as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, a minimum a quarter in advance, whether you do annual 6 months or 1 quarter, but give yourself that time so you're ready to kick it off when the quarter is actually there.
Yeah. Okay. And then another like super common question we get, if you don't have a dedicated employee to focus on marketing, do you still recommend trying to get MDF?
100%. 100%. I didn't have a big marketing department, and it's definitely hard sometimes because it does require a lot of time. What I would recommend, if you have limited resources, then don't go after 3 to 5 partners. Maybe just focus on one and learn just that one partners and the program guidelines for that specific or for that vendor, and just take one at a time. Don't try to do more than you have the time for, but whoever you're currently generating revenue for, then focus on them. But definitely go after the MDF dollars because it's there for you to use, but many vendors are not just going to hand it to you. You actually have to show them that you want it. So 100% go after the dollars.
Yeah. And especially like what you actually do with the money. If you don't have a lot of marketing support, you can tailor the programs to be more around sales enablement. So things that you're trying to kickstart, things that then the sales team can take over. Or always, obviously the option, this is a selfish answer, but if you want a third party partner, you can always partner with an agency like us to help you guys if you don't have in-house marketing. That's what we do for a ton of companies, is they don't have in-house marketing. So we act as their outsourced marketing department.
Yeah, I know we haven't really touched on that at all, but we actually do the entire process that we've discussed here today, from planning to execution to putting the proof of performance together. Those are all services that we offer here at Real Access to especially the partners that don't either, like, you don't even have a marketing department or you just have limited resources. We can help you with the entire process or pieces of it, but we've done it all. And that's super, super helpful if you are definitely limited on resources.
Okay, another question from the chat said, not sure if you can answer this, but are there specific partners that you found better or easier to work with?
That's a great question.
We'll have to walk on eggshells on that one.
Yeah, that one is hard. I mean, the answer to this is it doesn't really matter because you still need to go after the partners or vendors that make sense for you and your business. So whether, and it could be so much other elements of that can be involved, but the short answer is no. You want to focus on the partner and vendor relationship that makes sense for both parties and for the business.
I think too, back to the kind of, Anne talks a lot about like building relationships. If you have like a really strong relationship with a certain like your channel account manager, your partner account manager, a lot of times that person is who can kind of go in and fight for you to get funding. So if you already have strong relationships with certain CAMs or PAMs, I think that's a great place to start. And then as you build other relationships, you can start to expand into other areas. Or yeah, like we talked about, as you're kind of sitting down to think about your annual plan, look at the sales numbers from last year. Who did you sell the most of? Try to go after that one first. And in my experience, I mean, there's certain things that are just kind of funky about this industry and MDF in general that you're going to run into with really any manufacturer that you choose to work with. So that's kind of just like the cost of admission, unfortunately. But yeah, if you can, I mean, if you find somebody who you really do like to work with, that's always a great place to start, obviously. Okay, we maybe have time for one more here. Let's see. We are creating marketing MDF campaigns, expanding to new regions, which means that sometimes we don't have all the knowledge on what type of campaign will work out. How can we convince the vendor without pop?
Oh, you probably can't.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that one.
Yeah, the proof of performance is, there's not really a workaround there. It's always going to be required. What I would recommend the workaround is to know whatever initiative that you're trying to do, that that you can actually deliver those proof of performance that are required. But if this is a new market, new region, I would collaborate with the vendor side person, whoever, if it's a PAM or a CAM, to make sure that you're on the same page on what the expected result is. So that is outlined, and you put that in the proposal. Sometimes they can be very vague in the program description on what's required for proof of performance. So discuss it with them and have it part of the proposal so you know exactly what is expected. But you're not going to get around the whole requirement of proof of performance, but you can at least prepare yourself on what's expected.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, like keep it as simple as possible, especially if it's a new region and you don't know what's going to work yet. Treat it like an experiment, but try to hyper focus on like, what do we want the finding of this experiment to be? So don't try to throw in like 20 key performance indicators into your pop. Try to focus on what, you can work with the channel manager to figure out like, maybe these are the two things or the one thing that we really want to go deep on with this. And then you can kind of run an experiment on if that's going to work. Maybe give yourself some flexibility on if you can't get that exact result, then what, maybe kind of have a backup plan of what result you think you can get. But then that'll make the pop, you won't be able to get around submitting pop, but it'll at least make that submission a lot easier because you're not having to show we did 50 different things. It's like, hey, we did this one thing, but we did it really well. So just maybe try to simplify instead of just trying to avoid it. Okay, I think we're about out of time. We definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time. But if you guys have any questions that we weren't able to get to, please do feel free to send those. Anne's got her email on the screen, or you can obviously go to our website, just fill out a contact form, or we'll send out, like I said, the recording and the slides. If you want to just reply to that email, that'll come to us too. And if anybody wants to dive deeper into any of this, we're available to jump on strategy calls or kind of help consult on any of your MDF needs. So thank you so much for joining. I think hopefully this was really valuable to you guys. And hopefully we will see you at a future Real Access webinar, and hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you all.